and welcome back to the Money Bear podcast, my friends. As you all know, we've been in celebration of our 1 year anniversary. We have been We've been just like really diving deep into my story because that has been by far the number one listened to episode on the podcast in the last year. So I'm giving you guys what you want. And we left off on our last episode getting to the China years. And I was exactly. And I was like, because the last episode was like basically from when I met my ex who owes me 60 grand. We called him Tyler in the last episode.
Okay.
You should know.
Chestnut.
Yeah. And in this episode, I was like, so we ended up on like, and then I moved to China, and that's going to be a whole other episode because China is a decade, even though it only was a couple of years. So who I have on today, a treat, a delight, somebody who like, I feel like I should have gotten you on the podcast like a year ago, but at the same time, my bestie, my platonic soulmate, my warrior buddy from China, Sophie Banks is on. So Sophie is not a content creator. She's my best friend who actually, this is a funny story. I was on Hinge again because I hate myself apparently. And this guy, his first question to me was like, who's the most important person to you and why? And the number one person I thought of was you. And I was like, well, family's boring. Like we already know family. And I was like, let me tell you about my platonic soulmate, Sophie.
Oh my God. You just introduced me. I'm crying already. How dare you?
Sophie's the crier, guys. She'll cry for me as well.
Cancer season. Okay.
Oh my God. I love her so much.
I love you.
I love you too. That's what our whole podcast is going to be, is just us telling each other how much we love each other. But
and weeping.
Yeah. So Sophie, I don't know if you guys can recognize, she's got a little soft little Irish accent. She's from Ireland. We actually met in China. I think I met you probably the first month I was there.
Were you only there a month?
I was maybe there 2 months. Okay. It was okay. We're gonna have to come up with a name for the person who we're going to be talking a lot about.
Yeah.
What should we call him?
How like the original name should it be?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. His name that we know him as is not even his name. He goes by like, it was just his like English name that he would go by. It was like, you know how like in China you pick your name that you're gonna go by. Yeah, he basically did that, even though he wasn't from China.
Great.
What should we call him? Great. I mean, that's how I was tempted to just use his name, but then like some people will know who he is. And I was like, I want to protect his privacy.
I keep thinking of names of other exes of yours.
Yeah. No, let's not do that. Let's not do that. No, we need to how about like something just like funny? What's like a villain? Like what's a good villain name? Or just a funny name? Frank.
Frank.
We'll call him Frank.
Yeah. Okay.
Frank. Okay. So I'm pretty sure I met you it was at Frank's party.
Yep.
And at that point, he and I were already like in a semi-relationship. We were in a situationship. And that one chick was there, right? As well as Chris, who does not need to be protected.
Name and shame.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so that had to have been, because I met Frank within my first week or two of being, because I got scabies. Wait, no.
Oh my God.
No. Okay, guys. We're working on the time frame here. So I got scabies from that party that I met you at, which was weird. And then I was like,
the one who gave scabies to
No, it wasn't. It was not you. It was that chick. It was that girl who was with Frank. So yeah, I think it was within the first month that I met you then. Okay. And then,
yes.
So Sophie at the time, she was a like veteran expat in China.
Yes.
She had been there how many years?
Been there for like 3 years, I think. 1 year in a Chinese village and then 2 years in Wuhan. And then I met you. Maybe in the 4th year, actually.
You had just moved in with Miguel.
I don't mind naming my exes.
Yeah, he's a sweetie.
Yeah, I had just moved in with him. And there was that funny way that we actually met because
I had a crush on Miguel and I hadn't even met Miguel. So both Frank and Chris, I met on couch surfing.
Couch surfing.
Yeah. Yep. And like Chris was the one that I had been messaging. And for the record, for everybody who's listening, so like when I moved to China to make friends, couch surfing was kind of popular at the time. I don't know if it's still popular because like I don't travel like that anymore, but it was like just a way to meet people, or you could like sleep on their couches. And I had never slept on a couch, but I was like, well, let me like meet other expats because like I don't know how I'm gonna meet expats. And Chris was one of the first people to connect with me. Chris, not a good dude. He's like essentially a cult leader. In fact,
sleep on my couch, anyone?
Yeah, I would call him a predator for sure, knowing what I know about him now. But at the time, he just like presented himself as this like, oh gosh, how would you describe him? Like eccentric, queer, free love.
Yeah.
Anti establishment.
Anything.
Yes. But then would like admit to like sleeping with underage students at his English school, like where he taught. And I didn't find that out until much later on. But so that's how my entry into China started. Was my first friend outside of the school was this predator who I didn't know was a predator at the time, but like an absolute creep whose sole mission in life was to like impregnate as many people as possible. Like disgusting. So that was Chris. I met him, and Chris brought along Frank, and Frank and I like had this immediate connection of like, he was like a dark, sultry Eastern European man. And I was like, yeah, sign me up for that. He looked like trouble.
Tortured soul.
Exactly. And he hit me with the like, your eyes are so pretty, I don't even know how to look at you. And I was like, well, sign me up, sir. And couch surfing wise, I had also connected with Miguel, and I was obsessed with Spain. I was like, my goal in life is to marry a Spaniard, like so I can get Spanish citizenship. And I had not met Miguel. We kept like pushing it off because I think he was traveling a lot at the time. But then at this party, I meet this wonderful human being, Sophie. We're sitting on the floor, like by the couch. I remember it perfectly. And I just like, you know, when you meet somebody and you're just like, yeah, yep. That's exactly how it was with me and Sophie. We were like, it was love at first sight. And then she reveals to me that she is living with Miguel, and I'm like, oh, heartbroken, but it's okay because I love you more.
Yeah. And I don't even want Spanish citizenship. What a waste.
I know, like, come on, girl.
And you're already European.
Right, exactly. You don't need this. I need this. Let me take this win. And Sophie lives in Germany right now as well. I feel like I skipped that part of. So we met in China. She is Irish, I am American, and now she lives in Germany while I live in the United States. So that was our first meet, and we had a friendship where we would like see each other every like couple of months, I feel like. And then every time we'd see each other, we would just pick off when we started from. At the time, I'm so curious, and I think my audience would be interested to know this as well. What was like your first impression of me? What was I like at that time? Because now I'm so different.
Yeah, I hear that. Same. To be honest, like at that party, I remember just feeling like the same feeling that you described of like chatting to you and just being like, oh, thank God. Like there's somebody that I've met here who's like from the same soul soup. Because one thing we kind of like alluded to by you saying your first friend was somebody like Chris, who's a predator. In the environment that we were in, it was very much do or die, even though it's like a pretty developed city, like we all had jobs, like things were secure, but the environment was like anybody who was an immigrant. I don't really like using the word expat, but that's what we were using at the time. It was like trauma bonding because the cultural difference was so extreme that like you would really like clutch onto anyone that was kind of similar to the culture we were from. And it was, I remember just feeling such a relief to have met you. And even what you described about like the frequency with which we saw each other, we lived on a different side of the city.
And like to get perspective, the city was the size of the state Rhode Island. So it's like to get from where I lived in Hankou to where you lived in Guangzhou, it was like 2 hours, where it was like an hour on a bus and then like an hour on a train. So it was like you were going for the long haul.
Totally.
And I mean, it would go by fast because like the transportation system, I will say in China, at least where we lived, was really pretty
It was
good.
efficient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was efficient for sure. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. So when we would see each other, it would be these epic meetups that would go on
Mm-hmm.
for hours,
Mm-hmm.
either like sitting in, again, what felt like a creature comfort of like a tea house or
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks, how nice. And it was like this weird foreign thing for us suddenly we were in that city.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I remember other days where you would come over to my apartment and again, we would just talk and talk. We discovered we had like this music thing in common. So we also like started doing that. And like for me, growing up around music was really like a piece of home.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things, I felt like just so happy and positive that you were in my life. And as well as that, like now looking back on that, Chloe, with the perspective that we have now, I didn't know or I couldn't see at the time that it was a struggle
Mm-hmm.
for you for like the different jobs and stuff that you were in up until you took that final job in that last year. And that's when I really saw like, oh, China is not for this person anymore.
Yeah, it's not working. I feel like
Yeah.
when I first got to China, I was so Pollyanna. I was so like, everything
Mm-hmm.
is wonderful and amazing, and I'm so happy to be here. And you could say anything to me, and I could spin it into a positive thing. And
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
of that, like I was like living in this like very naive, positive bubble. I was really easy for bad people to take advantage of me. Like, case in point, Chris and Frank. And it was like I had started existing in this plane of magical thinking of
Yeah.
like, believe. And like I will say China kind of sets you up for that, where it's like as an immigrant, as a Western immigrant in China, you're treated so differently. You're treated
Yeah.
like a celebrity almost. You get all these special privileges and special
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. You don't ever worry about any of the repercussions of what you do because nobody messes with foreigners. Like it was this totally different space of going from like for us back in the United States when I left, it was like I was making barely above minimum wage. I
Yeah.
was struggling. I had to live with my parents, like to, oh my gosh, I have so much money living in China.
Yeah. My
Nobody can
own
tell me any.
apartment.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
completely free. I have my own apartment and it's like this setup to almost live in this la la land. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the community that we met there, the like diaspora of Westerners who lived in China, Wuhan, China specifically. First of all, there's not a lot of foreigners in Wuhan, China. There's like, I would always say it was like, it seems like maybe out of 12 million people, there's maybe like 10,000 foreigners here, or
Mm.
Westerners here. I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it was really small. It seemed like that was the vibe. And I remember you and I often talking about like, this is like, there's nobody here. We see who we want to be like,
Mm-hmm.
where it was just like this constantly, like we were all taking a break from reality, it felt like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because in Ireland at the time, it wasn't like you could get a job in Ireland.
I mean, I probably could have. I probably could have. Like what I was doing in China was quite aimless. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
teaching English, even though that was like for you, that was an intention
Mm-hmm.
to teach English and to have some connection to the English language. I was
Mm.
just doing it for a visa
Yeah.
and a good time and a cheap standard of living. And
Yeah. Where you
yeah, I
don't have
got
to worry about anything.
sucked in big time.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, there was something else I wanted to say.
I was
Where was
saying,
it?
I was talking about how it was like we got to live in this fantasy land because back home it was not as easy as it was in
Oh,
China from
yeah.
a like a practical standpoint because it in
Right, right,
every
right.
way China was difficult in every way except for the basics. It's almost like the stuff that's easy here at home, the
Yeah.
easy things in the US is like socializing, making friends, fitting in,
Mm, mm,
finding your community. All
yeah.
that stuff in China was really difficult, but the easy
Mm,
stuff was paying for rent, paying your
yeah.
bills, like being able to afford a nice vacation. All that
Mm-hmm,
stuff for
mm-hmm,
us was
mm-hmm.
easy, but like all
Yeah.
the like deep needs beyond money were not,
Mm.
like we were not fulfilled in that way except for our relationship.
Did you have a sense at the time that your needs weren't being met? Because, like, for me, when I think back on that time, I was so even unaware of like the
Oh
things you
yeah.
just listed of like, I need to have people in my life that I want to be more like, or like any of those things. It was
Mhm.
very, very much survival mode. So I don't think
Yeah.
I even could articulate a need at that time.
There was like pre-Frank and post-Frank Chloe. I had two very different perspectives. Pre-Frank or during Frank, which I was like in my magical thinking era of like everything is wonderful and amazing. This is magical. Anything I want to happen could happen. Like that level of magical thinking. And I did feel like my needs were getting met. Like I felt like, you know, with you as a friend and with, I almost said his name, Frank, nobody knows or cares probably, but I felt very fulfilled. And it wasn't until that was ripped away from me very quickly and suddenly that I was like, I don't have deep friendships here. I don't have purpose here. I don't like that I don't fit in. I don't like that you know, I don't have my family here. I've only got Sophie. I've only got Wally at the time as well. And it was just like everybody else was very much a surface level friendship because so many people who were in our community at the time, it was like, it was a party community. It was like a let's go on a bar crawl this weekend community. It wasn't like, it was like we were living in a constant state of like spring break almost. And it was like, no, I want like meaningful relationships. I want connection. But because I so consistently couldn't find that except for with you, honestly, like only with you, like there was security and comfort with Wally for sure. But it made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Not that this was just not the right environment for me, that this was not like the right place for me. And then of course, after everything that happened with Frank, I was also like, I was surviving. I was like, the anxiety and the trauma of it just made it a miracle that I was like getting through every day. So at that point, it was like so very clear that something was wrong, but I didn't know. I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem. I didn't think it was China. And like, to be fair, it was also me. I was the problem. There's nothing necessarily wrong with China. It's just that it wasn't right for me, especially with what I was going through at that time. You know what I mean?
Like that phrase, wherever you go, there you are.
Yes. Oh,
also,
yeah.
Like we were just babies. Like, I don't know if that's clear
10
from this
years ago.
chat. Like, I moved to China when I was 19.
That's so crazy to me.
If you're 19 and you're listening to this, you have far more wits about you than I did when I was 19 because I thought I fucking ruled the world and I didn't know anything about finance. It was just like, yeah, fuck it.
Yep.
But yeah, like our brains weren't even fully developed. And like the mad thing for me was, I don't know what it was like in your school because you were teaching more kids and I was like teaching adults. They really emphasized the need to teach critical thinking through our lessons. And it's so funny looking back and thinking like, I had such pride in being like, oh yeah, I had this great breakthrough moment with a student where like, I saw them thinking critically about this thing. Meanwhile, Sophie was drinking 4 nights a week and in abusive relationships and all sorts of things where I should have applied that own critical thinking like to those scenarios. But it just, yeah, like you said before, it was like survival mode. Those parts of our brain were not even switched on. Let alone developed.
Yeah.
Mad, you know?
It is because I was 23. You were there for my birthday party that Frank put on. So to give us more context, that would have been May of 2014, which was 3 months after I arrived in China, or 2 or 3 months after I arrived in China. And yeah, I didn't know shit about shit.
But we felt like we did.
We certainly, well, especially too, because I had already been through so much therapy. So I really thought that I knew how to exist in the world and to recognize my needs. And like, to be fair, I think what I held my hat on for so long was that I was never at the same point that I was in college, where it was like, I was so depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. I was binge eating all the time. I was drinking all the time. And it was like, I had such a tight hold on my behaviors that I was like, we're not going to drink at all. Yeah. We are going to run for an hour a day in fucking China. I probably have like permanent lung damage from that. And it was just like, I had such a tight grip on the things that I thought I could control, not understanding in the ways that brought me anxiety and that it made it like impossible for me to make decisions at times where it was just like I didn't get the full experience that I wish I could have had in China, like in like traveling around the country and things like that. But it was like, to me, even though I was suffering, I didn't think I was suffering as bad as I suffered in my college years, because it was like I was still showing up for work. I was still exercising. I was the only vice I had was binge eating, like daily. But there was something that you said that made me, that like pulled out a memory that I know you and I have talked about many times, is when you said like everywhere you go, there you are. I remember, and we'll talk about the Frank stuff here in a minute, because those of you who haven't listened to the first podcast episode are probably like, tell us the Frank stuff. They're like, what happened? I remember telling you, like, I was so depressed and I was so anxious all the time. And I was aware of it. Like, I was pretty vocal about the fact that I wasn't doing okay by the time that I wasn't doing okay. I remember saying like, hey, at least I know I'll never off myself, because like my worst nightmare is if in this afterlife, the only person, like, I'm afraid I'll just be stuck with myself, and like it'll just be me and myself for all of eternity. And I was like, I cannot imagine a worse fate. And I was like, so at least that's that like bright point. I'm like saying this to you at like a fucking Pizza Hut in Guangzhou. Or actually, I think it was curry. I think we're eating Indian food. Yeah. So I met this person a couple weeks after I arrived in China, and very quickly developed a situationship with him that first climaxed at, no pun intended, the party where I met Sophie at, because at that point, he and I had been together. We had been casually seeing each other. He had kind of told me that he wasn't really into monogamy. And I was like, sure you aren't. I'll change him. Let me change you.
Wait till you see my love.
Challenge accepted. Yeah. Wait till you just haven't been loved by Chloe fucking Daniels, where I will change my entire personality in order to be what you need. At that party, it was a few days after I had finally slept with him. He had like been pushing and trying, and I was like, no, I'm not going to sleep with you until like we're in a relationship. And then finally I couldn't resist anymore, and I slept with him. And I was super young. I mean, he was 27, I think at the time. I was like 22 or 23. And I remember, this is recovering some bad memories. I remember after sleeping with him, he said I fucked like a porn star. And he did not mean that as a compliment. He meant that as like I was a performative. I was clearly not like in the moment. I was clearly like just like acting like a porn star. And I was like, honestly, you're probably right. Cause like I don't know anything about sex. Like at this point, like I'm still figuring it out. And like I've been told that this is what like men want. And I'm performing that. But like being 22 or 23, I was humiliated. That was immediately after we had sex, which should have been like a warning sign, but like we're young and dumb. We didn't know that was disrespectful. Instead, I've internalized it and was like, something's wrong with me. He's right. You know, this person will teach me how to be a better lover or whatever.
Yeah, like what role does he have in this performative situation?
Right. So that happened. That was our first experience together on his like purple silk sheets
full of scabies
that were clearly full of scabies, because then I got fucking scabies on my face. The worst part. My poor podcast production team's like, wow, we're learning a lot about Chloe today.
I'm not sure what to cut out.
Elevate, you can keep most of it. So anyway, that happens, and then like a week later, he's hosting a party, and I'm like so excited, and I'm like, yes, a party. He's invited me, and he's like telling me I'm like the guest of honor, and I'm like, sure, so excited. I show up, and there's this woman there who I haven't met before, but she's like staying with him and Chris. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And like you meet her right away, and you're like, oh, she's like a party girl waif, like clearly they're all fucking.
And down to clown.
Down to clown. Like these people are doing the drugs, having the sex, and I'm just showing up like my innocent Midwestern self who was just so ready to be loved and to love. And I'm like making every excuse in the book. I'm like, no, surely they're just like hanging out. They're all just friends. Well, during that party, I think while you and I were sitting on the floor talking, him, Chris, and this lady all leave and they go have sex in his bedroom while I am sitting on the floor of his apartment. He comes back, sits down next to me, and he says something along the lines of like, you did this to yourself, or this is your fault. And I just look at him totally stunned. Like what was going through my mind at the time was, I mean, he's kind of right. You knew what you were getting into. You knew this is who he was, and you decided to pursue him anyway. Like, can you even be mad, Chloe? You can't be mad. And it was like, I was sitting there and I was like, old Chloe would have taken this as an opportunity to get super drunk and make a scene or leave or like cause drama. And I was like, instead, I'm just going to sit here and mull it over, accept the feeling, and like, you know, just accept the fact that like, yeah, you did know what you were getting into. And so like I stayed for like another couple of hours, eventually left, and was like, all right, what we can learn from this is like, he's not our person. He's not somebody that we can be dating, and, you know, move on from it. And so that's what happened. Do you remember any of that?
No, like when we
Really?
were meeting one another, maybe you did tell me, but I don't remember you saying even like that you were with Frank or any of
Sure.
those things. Certainly, I never picked up. I don't remember him coming and sit. Like, I don't think that I was there for that interaction
No,
because
because at that point I was
I
sitting.
already didn't like Frank. Like, I was
Yeah.
at that party with a friend of a friend,
Who were you
not
there
because
with?
Frank. Do you
Was it
remember Paul?
Paul?
Irish
Was he the
Paul from Northern Ireland?
did he also do drag?
No, I wish.
Oh my gosh, I can't remember Irish Paul. Wait, was Irish Paul, was he a bigger guy?
Yeah.
Okay, I remember Irish Paul.
Yeah.
I liked Irish Paul. He'd be great in drag.
Yeah, he would. That's what I wish.
Yeah.
No, I was there with Irish Paul, and I already had met Frank, I want to say like 3 or 6 months prior in a pub. And my first observation of him was, that's a pickup artist.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever talked about this.
Really?
What was your first impression of him? And had you heard things about him? Because after everything happened, a bunch of people would tell me, like, oh, yeah, I heard this about him. I'm like, why did no one fill me in on what? Granted, I wouldn't have been open or receptive to hearing it, I don't think.
Yeah. So the bar was also in Gwangu area. So I'm not sure if he actually knew people or if maybe that's how he met Paul. But the night that I clocked him, I was like, that's a pickup artist, because I saw him go from table to table and he had like a pickup artist hat.
Yeah,
classic.
Of course. Of course. Oh
classic
my gosh.
Trilby. And he was doing like a magic trick.
Yep. Yeah, he did that for me as well.
It was the magic trick whereby the result is you get somebody's phone number.
Oh,
yes.
Smooth.
Quite smooth, but also I saw him neg somebody. Like, it was just like, I was not that informed actually about pickup artistry at that time, but it was enough for me to be like,
ew,
not someone I'm going to be mates with.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, why maybe I think you were already like deep in it, because like I said, we had this friendship where it was like, it was immediate, like love at first sight, but then I'll see you in 1 to 2 months.
Right. Because we live on opposite sides of the state, essentially.
Exactly. The other side of Idaho.
Yep.
And I think that I actually, like, I saw you at that party, and then I'm not super sure on this, but maybe it was like 1 month or even 2 months later, I saw you, and then it was like you were really in the thick of like the full drama of
it was so fast.
Frankness, which is not the right time to be like, I thought he was a pickup artist all along.
Of course not. Of course not. Yeah. That's so wild. No, I remember, I don't know if you remember Sam, who was like another guy you didn't like, who he was like, he was, I would say there's a theme. I mean, he was pretty harmless, but he was kind of a creep. I would go. So it was a period of my life after everything that happened with Frank where I was just like, I can't be alone. Like, I literally just cannot spend a second alone because I don't want to be alone with my own thoughts. But I remember him telling me like, oh yeah, that guy's like a fucking douchebag. He thinks like he's the hot shit. He's constantly lying. Like he claims he knows stuff about stuff he doesn't know anything about. And I was like, wow, it's all starting to make some sense. But essentially, so in a nutshell, to try and condense this as much as possible, Frank and I, after that party, you would have thought that would be over, but we were not. I tried to distance myself because afterwards I got scabies anyway, and I had to like stay home. I was like isolated for a few days, if not a whole week, where it was like you weren't really supposed to like go out in public because it could spread. And during that time, it was just like I was doing me. And then eventually, him and Chris were very like codependent. And Frank was the type of person who he would latch on to people and he would like essentially like become that person. He'd like absorb all their personality traits and they'd become like wildly intimate, even if it wasn't intimate in a sexual way. Although with him and Chris, like, I mean, they were having three-ways and stuff like that together. So clearly there was also some intimacy there as well. And there were so many red flags along the way as well that we don't have to get into. But he had messaged me a little bit after I got scabies and was just like, hey, Chris is out of town. You know, do you want to do some stuff? And I was like, honestly, I was like, I'd be happy to do stuff as friends because like I enjoy your company. But, you know, I think you and I in any sort of like intimate romantic relationship is just like a recipe for disaster. And he was like, haha, sure. Like, let's see how long that lasts. And
challenge accepted.
exactly. And I didn't last very long. I think I lasted approximately 12 hours. And I had this really moment of, I guess you could say, clarity. I don't know if clarity is the right word because it was kind of delusional. Was I had just gone on a date with somebody else who was from Wuhan and I didn't enjoy it. And I was like, I'd much rather be hanging out with Frank. And after that date, I was telling him about it. And he was just like, why don't you just like come over? Let's hang out and do X. I don't know what we were doing, but I mean, I know what we were doing, but
Hi-yo.
I know exactly what we were doing. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to go over to his house. And I was on the bus and I was just like, I would literally give anything to feel the way that I feel when I am with Frank. And I know it's probably going to end badly, but like, I'm willing to hop on this train. Like, I'm willing to see what happens and go for it because like, it's like a drug. Like, I feel like I'm like taking this drug and I am willing to just say like, fuck it, let's try. Cause what if it turns out beautiful? Obviously it did not turn out beautiful. It did turn out pretty terrible in ways that I could have never possibly imagined. In a very condensed version of the story, Frank ended up having some paranoid schizophrenic type breaks with reality where in our relationship, which we ended up falling in love, we got engaged, he started to believe that he was God. And in a lot of ways, I enabled him because of my magical thinking of where I was at the time and me taking everything that he said that would have been questionable or a cause for concern. I like took it on my role to be like his translator, to be like, oh, this is what he said, something that's clearly problematic, clearly an issue. And I would essentially translate it in my brain to be something that was reasonable and understandable and logical. And I'd spit it back to him and I'd say, is this what you mean by that? And he'd be like, yeah, that's exactly what I mean by it. And so it was just, I was continually, enabling him, which made the whole situation really bad. And eventually he got to the point where he stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. I had to like force feed him shakes sometimes. And eventually he went missing. He went missing for over 12 hours where he had dropped me off at work and he had left on his scooter and gone to Gwangju, which again is like 2 hours away from where I worked. And nobody had heard from him for a while. And we all knew he had been acting erratic and strange. And we started calling everybody that we knew. And like around midnight on July 4th, which this is interesting, Sophie, I recently, this July 4th, I was just feeling melancholic. And I was journaling about it. And I was like, I realized the reason I generally get melancholic on July 4th is because almost every single July 4th in the last 10 years has been bad. Like there's been something that has happened. It's very rare that it's like a neutral day for me. And I was like, no wonder I don't like 4th of July. It's like, first of all, this happened, but then it's like every year since then has been like something not good has happened and like something very not good. But anyway, We end up finding him, me, his boss, some of his friends. We end up finding him after searching for many hours. He's at a police station in Gwangju and he is like shirtless. He's bleeding. He's shaking. And so the police officer called his boss and was like, we have him. He appears to be drunk because he's just babbling on and on about how he saw some demons and he was battling these demons to try and get back to his angel, which was me. And he like got into a fight with some local residents in Gwangju and he had given away his scooter, he had given away his like belongings, his keys, his wallet. He was just like, he was telling them, he's like, I'm Jesus, I'm Jesus, I'm Jesus. And like I was battling demons all day to get back to my angel because I've decided I don't want to be Jesus anymore. I want to be a human. I want to be with my angel. The issue though was that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues in that. But so we find him, we grab him, and he's like, he's not even in touch with reality in that the fact that he's alive. He's like looking at me like, am I dead? Is this like, have I died? Am I still alive? And we're like, you're not dead yet. But like, if you keep doing stuff like this, like, we don't know what's going to happen to you. Like, you don't want to be getting in fights in Gwangju and like, you're clearly hallucinating. And so they send me back home with him, and it's just me and him in his apartment. And I'm fucking terrified because clearly he's not thinking logically and he's not himself. And I go and I like hide all the knives and I like try to do what I can to make sure I'm safe and he's safe. And we try to go to sleep and I'm like trying to stay awake and I end up falling asleep. And when I wake up, he's gone. And I'm like starting to panic. I'm calling Laura again, which is his boss, and just being like, hey, he's gone again. What do? I don't know what to do. And luckily, and like as soon as I start to leave, she starts coming over. She has a car. She starts coming over. There's a knock on the door and he's standing there and he's wearing a like wool sweater, which it was like a Wuhan summer day, July 5th or 4th. And it's hot as hell. Like it's basically a sauna. And he's wearing
100% humidity.
Yep. He's wearing my dress and he is shoeless. Like he's been walking through the streets of China without his keys, without any shoes on, wearing a wool sweater and my dress. And when I open the door, he starts crying and he says, he's like, I was invisible. I was walking through the streets and I was totally invisible. And I was just like, in that moment, I just remember feeling like I was melting, just being like, oh my God, this is out of my control. Like I can't do this. Like he's going to end up hurt or I am. And in that moment, I was like, he could see kind of that reaction on my face. And he was like, I need to go to the hospital, don't I? And I was like, yes. And he's like, and I need to go for a little while, don't you think? And I was like, yeah, probably. And so in that like moment of clarity, I got so much hope and I was like, thank God Laura's on her way with the car. But he was so volatile that just one thing could like turn him to essentially a different personality where he would go back into like you're a demon and I need to like, and I'm Jesus and I'm going to kill you and I'm going to destroy you. And I unfortunately was on the receiving end of that. So I was both his angel and possessed by a demon. And he thought in order to get his angel back, he had to kill off this demon that was also me. So I'm like trying to keep him distracted, trying to keep him from not switching so that we can at least get him into the car, into the hospital. And after another like 12-hour day where it did not go as planned, eventually after getting the police involved, we were able to get him into a mental health facility. And that's like where it's like the story continues on, but long story short, he ended up getting deported back to his home country because he extended his stay in China. And once he arrived in his home country, didn't really recognize mental illness in the same way. And he was able to convince them that he was totally fine. And so he's living his life untreated in his home country, as far as I'm aware. And in that time frame where he was in the hospital, he had started to spin this tale of him ending up there was my fault. I had lied to the doctors and told them all these stories. And I was just on this big rampage to ruin his life from what he did to me before we started dating. And he'd send out email blasts. He'd text me. He would like convince people in the hospitals to let him use their phone. And he'd text me from all these different numbers and like just demanding things like that. So it was like 3 months of him being in the hospital. So it was like, even though he ended up in the hospital, it wasn't like the story and the traumatizing experience ended. It was like then 3 months of torture of trying to serve this person who I was in love with and who I was like literally willing to move to his home country to take care of him for, to then being the villain because he was essentially blaming everything on me. And I just had to accept it. It was like part of me believed him because it was like I had been enabling him. And then not only that, he had no family. He had nobody there who was like as close to him as I was. So guess who was the point person for all his doctors? I was going and not even being able to speak Mandarin. So I had to have a translator and work with like, so it was like I was thrown into at 23 years old, thrown into this insane fucking thing all by myself where it was like, no one could have possibly understood I didn't even understand what I was going through because it was like part of me was so in love with him that it was like, I don't care if you think you're God, I will do whatever it takes to like,
I want to be with God.
I will be with you. I will give up my whole life to like make sure you're okay and that we can stay together because I loved him so much. But then like as an adult now, and even in the months afterwards where he cut off contact with me once he arrived in his home country, his doctor, or so he had said, told him that I was the problem, that I was the issue, that he'd be totally fine if he cut off all communication with me. And part of it felt like a relief, but part of it just felt so devastating where it was like, until I got that text message, it was just like,
you're identified with being his carer.
Exactly. And so only then when I got that text message from him was it almost like I was released. And then the processing and the, oh, fuck, what just happened in the last 6 months started to unravel. And I entered into stage 2 of, or probably 3, because stage 2 was while he was in the hospital, stage 3 of Chloe in China. And it was not pretty. It was pretty bad. So that was in a nutshell what happened in China with Frank.
One thing to point out there that you said that like whole thing went on over 6 months was also that the good time was also only like 3 months, right? Where you
6 months, I would combine that is this the whole thing happened in 6 months.
6 months.
The whole thing. So from meeting him in probably February 2014 to him getting deported in, I want to say it was either, it was September, end of September 2014. So what's that? February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. I guess it's 8 months. But like we were not officially together until around my birthday. So I want to say it was like April, May when we got together officially, where he was not fucking other people as far as I know. Yeah, it was a whirlwind, but it's kind of like what you said is you trauma bond with the people in China. Like when you find people who you see yourself in, who you feel seen with, it's like your relationships, they just develop so much quicker than they would here in the United States or in your home country where you have your community, you have your support system, you have the people who are reasonable telling you like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, are you okay? You're not yourself. I have that. I just had, even you, I think I saw maybe once or twice during that whole thing. And it wasn't until it was all over that it was like you and I saw each other more consistently because obviously my life wasn't wrapped up in being his caregiver. It was a whole wild experience. And financially, so I feel like I gotta wrap this up.
Tie it in.
Yes, financially, I didn't have any money. Like I had some savings to cover my student loan payments while I was in China. But I remember by the time, this is like plot twist, 6 months to a year after he got deported, he somehow ended up back in the country. And I remember, I think he was in, what was that beach town? Qingdao? You know what I'm talking about?
Okay.
Qingdao, it's up north. It's like a beach town in China. And I remember he had ended up there. And I don't remember how I had found out through the grapevine. But I remember at that time I had already spent 6 months to a year in hell of just being miserable and anxious 24/7, totally not fully processing what happened and kind of just blaming myself and not trusting myself, because it's like the fact that after that relationship was over, what I had to process was not only what happened, but the fact that he actually was not a good guy all along.
Yeah.
Like at no point was he actually a good, healthy relationship. I was just in love with him, but it was like he at so many points in the relationship was a predator and was a bad person and was controlling. But I didn't recognize that until after everything imploded. And so I had to try and process that on my own. And I was like, I wasn't going to therapy because I was in China. And eventually, when I found out that he was back, I remember telling my parents, just being like, he's somehow back here. And I was like, and I know this seems unreasonable, but like, I'm scared that he's back here. Like the last I knew, he thought I was a demon and he wanted to kill me. And now here he is back in China. And it's like, even though we're like probably the distance from like New York to Miami, like it freaks me out. And my parents were like, you have to come home. We're not allowing you to be there, knowing that he is there and what you fucking went through. And you're miserable anyway. And so I remember having to call my boss and explain what happened. And what's crazy is he had already heard about what had happened to Frank. Like living in a completely different city. He was in Xi'an. The news had already made its way to Xi'an by the time I moved there for my second job. And my first night of arriving in Xi'an, somebody was telling me a story about a dude who lost his damn mind and thought he was God in Wuhan, China. And I was like, yeah, that's my ex-fiance.
I hope there was just one.
Oh my God, you're right. Yeah, well, you never know with the
Wuhan effect.
Yeah. And so I told him that. He's like, I totally understand. And he actually had a brother who was a paranoid schizophrenic. And he was like, I fully understand like your fear. And like, yes, you should leave. Especially if you're not happy. So the reason I had stayed despite being miserable afterwards is because I didn't have money to leave. I didn't have any job prospects. I was scared that I couldn't get a job. And so I just stayed. And I feel like you as well stayed because of money for a long period of time, even though it was like you weren't happy.
It was more of a mental block for me, I think, than money. Like everything you're talking about with Frank, I will save your podcast listeners my own abusive relationship tales from Wuhan, China.
But guys, we can have a whole series on that.
Part of the reason why you and I bonded so much is because when you were going through that, I'm like, I just went through that 6 months ago with someone else. I didn't go through that. I didn't go through the psychotic break, but like being with a narcissist, internalizing all of the blame for like, well, there must be something wrong with me. As a like, I didn't love that person hard enough, being totally codependent, all of the above. But I moved to China. So I studied business and Chinese in university in Ireland. And then I had like my Erasmus year and my year abroad was my first time in China. And that was in a rural village where that's, again, a whole other episode. But I returned to China because during that Erasmus year, I had met a very toxic person that I was like, oh, it's the love of my life. I'm going to move back to China and just be with this person and become an English teacher, which is like not something I ever wanted to do in my life. Just completely change who I am and what I want in my life and where I live in the world to be with a guy. And moved to Wuhan to be with him. And I wonder for you if you have the same thing of like, I feel like before living in China, I had a sense of my own intuition. I was just a child, of course. But looking back, I'm like, I was really in touch with my intuition, actually. I knew who I wanted to hang around with or who I didn't, or what I wanted to do, or what I didn't. And when I went to China, I had to turn off my intuition because my intuition was telling me, get the fuck out of there. And I was like, but it's so exciting.
Like, and it's so much easier than like struggling somewhere else.
And everything that you think is like a normal thing, like even just going to the supermarket, you're like, this is a normal thing. You're constantly like reminded, like, nope, it's not normal. Even the potato chips, you're like, blueberry flavor. Okay. What I thought was wrong. And you get into this mindset, even if you never encounter a narcissist, what I was thinking was wrong.
Yes.
And I think that actually opened me wide open to being like, I'm going to be with someone from a totally different culture than what I'm from. I like went to the other end of the spectrum. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, what was it like for you before you'd moved to China? Had you ever had any like moments that you can look back on and say like, okay, well, China and the Frank situation is not the first time that I was magically thinking
that I like abandoned myself. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying we had to do. Like, because you had to open yourself up to a completely different way of living, of existing in the world. And because if you, and to be fair, as somebody who is a guest in another country, that's what you kind of need to do, because you need to be respectful. You can't come to another country where you are a visitor, where you are a guest, and try to change things. Like, that's not okay. You have to open yourself up to do exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, to be fair, like, if you're going to do that at any point, doing it in your 20s is like the perfect time to do that, to open yourself up to understanding different ways of life. So it's like this double-edged sword, because it's like, that's what you should do. But also the loss of identity, I think, is real, especially when you're in your early 20s. And for me, I was just getting a hold of my identity. I was just starting to grasp who I was and who I wanted to be. And that was so quickly ripped away from me because I immediately latched on to somebody else who was like, I was like, my identity is now intertwined with this person. I remember telling myself, like, because I feel like throughout my life, my identity has shifted significantly many times. And that at that point, that had already been true. I had already had these experiences where it's like, you know, I could give you these like short periods of time where I was a very different person, like to the umpteenth degree, where I was like a very religious, like goody two shoes person who never wanted to drink, never would smoke pot, never would do anything like that, to party central, let's fuck everyone, drink all the things, you know, smoke all the pot, do that, to something in between, to like there's just so many changes that I had along the way in the process of discovering who I wanted to be and who I actually am.
Of course.
And it was like, by the time I got to China, I had just found my footing as a more stable Chloe, because in college I had spent so much time unstable, to the other extreme of like basically bipolar, where it was like I'd have these episodes of mania, but I would also have these episodes of like extreme depression where I couldn't get out of bed for like days at a time. So like 6 months prior to leaving for China, I had started to develop this stability by living with my parents, doing like basic self-care of like eating 3 meals a day that had vegetables in them, and drinking water, and not drinking my weight in alcohol every night. And by the time I got to China, I had this like desperate desire to maintain that, because I was so scared of going back to who I was before, who had no control, who was like the complete opposite person. And I think that I remember, and this is so embarrassing to say now, I don't know if I've ever said this out loud to other people, and maybe I have, but I remember thinking I was the perfect person to love Frank because I was such a chameleon, because it was like I was so good at changing to be what somebody else needed. And like, I think the people pleaser in me, the old empath, because I'm not as empathetic as I used to be by design, like that's on purpose. It was just like, I felt like it was like my life's calling all of a sudden to be with this person, because I could understand him. I could take his wild shit and turn it into something reasonable and understandable. And I could like be there for him. And I was like, and I remember even having that conversation with him and being like, I was made to love you. Like, I was made to be your person, because I get you. I get all the different versions of you. And like, I love every different version of you. And I was proud of that. But in that process, it was like, I told myself my identity, who I was just a chameleon. And that there was no core belief. There was no core Chloe. it was just whatever I needed to be for somebody else. And I chose him. It was like, that's what I could do. So it was like that. Does that make sense? Like, it's like,
yeah,
that was my identity at that time, was
society.
Yeah. I mean, truly, like,
Conditioning. Yeah.
that's exactly what society tells women to be. And I had mastered it. Is I was like, yeah, you need me to love this motherfucker? Absolutely, sign me up. I was made for this. And like, that's the, like, when you look at the pattern of the most toxic relationships I've had, which there's been a lot of them, that concept of, I will be the one to love you. I will be the one who can put up with your shit. I will be the one who can not even necessarily change you, but who can put up with it, who can love you into submission, or who can love you into domesticity or whatever. Not anymore, but like, that is definitely a pattern that showed up throughout my life. And fucking society, man.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's so many factors, right? There's the societal conditioning that you're not supposed to have wants, needs, thoughts, opinions. Your main purpose in life is to find a man who'll put up with you.
Yep.
And if even a toxic as fuck person still with you, you know, unless they're having a psychotic break, but
but don't worry, I'm perfect. I can handle this because I'm so strong.
Easy.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the third one. You're supposed to be strong in the face of adversity, no matter what.
And you're supposed to be selfless. And that was the thing.
Selfless, care for everyone over yourself.
Everyone over yourself, to the point where you're literally willing to move to a country that is not particularly friendly to women to take care of a person who is abusive, because you love him so much. And you were like, this is my role in life. My role in life is to serve this person.
Yeah.
It's like, ew. I'm so glad I am who I am now. But man, it's scary to think about the fact that I was so close to giving up my life for somebody who I probably would have ended up dead. So what got you out?
So circling back to why I stayed there, I was there for 5 years in total. And I think when I graduated after my first Erasmus year, my classmates had gone to like Taipei and Beijing, and they came back with like pretty good Chinese. And I went to a rural village where nobody spoke Mandarin. And I had a darn tootin' good time, but my Mandarin was really crap by the time I graduated. And then also this toxic guy luring me back, and I was just like, well, I had no life plan before this point, so fuck it, move back to China. And for some reason that it's still unknown to me where this comes from in my like life's history, but I felt like if I left China without feeling a sense of success, that everyone would judge me and that I wouldn't be accepted back into my previous communities. I didn't feel even drawn to move back to Ireland, but I felt like if I really opened up and even told my family what was going on, like, it's so good that you had a relationship with your family, like a communication between you and your family through that time, because I completely like it's so weird because I'm a very open, loving person, and in relationships I used to be like very attached. But when I moved to China, I became so avoidant, and I sent one email to my mom like every 3 months, which is just mad. But I felt like I couldn't tell them what was going on in my life, otherwise I'd be a failure. And
I felt similarly in the finances space. I never explained that the reason, I mean, I think I told my parents, like, I can't come home because basically the same thing that you're saying is like, I'm a failure. I haven't
conquered the economy yet.
I haven't conquered this. And when I got that second job, which the job was like my dream job at the time, I got to travel all around the country, granted traveling all around the country to the tiniest villages ever, making a difference in these schools. And like, that was a dream job. But in the mental state that I was in, I was constantly isolated, which was like the worst thing for my mental health. And my anxiety was like debilitating. But I like, same thing that you said is like, I didn't feel like I could come back because I didn't have anything to stand on. I didn't want, financial support and all of that stuff as well.
And it's just like mentally not even an option. Like in many of the times where, not even like toward the end of my stay there, it was like right in the middle, actually, when it was like my worst time was before meeting you. Of course. You changed my life.
Just change your life.
Well, I was really like at rock bottom. I should have just gone home.
Yeah.
And instead, I went to Hong Kong to get a tourist visa so I could return, so that I could get another job, so that I could stay even longer. And it was like, those are the moments where you can like see the branches and being like, that could have been an alternate reality for me. Wonder what would have happened if I'd moved home at that point.
Yeah.
But anyway, I stayed for a total of 5 years. And in my last year, I was in a wonderful relationship with Wally, who's previously mentioned in this episode. And I think Wally was in China for a total of a year.
2 years.
Was it 2 years?
Yeah.
Well, also not a place for Wally. And he was very sure that like, once my contract is finished, I am out of here. And
he hated it.
I'd been there for 5 years and was like earning pretty good money. I had reached a stage in my like lifestyle. In the first year you're there, you're like eating everything with chopsticks or your hands and catching bugs and parasites and all sorts of things. And in my last year, I was like, I'm a civilized lady. I get filtered coffee from the supermarket. And I had like got to a lifestyle point where I was actually like so comfortable.
Yeah. You had that beautiful apartment all by yourself. I remember.
Nice apartment. I was very comfortable, but it was actually like, comfort wasn't exactly the thing that I was seeking that whole time. Like I moved to China largely because it was uncomfortable. And I thought that I would only grow as a person if I was constantly facing struggles.
Yeah.
Turns out you could grow through insights as well.
But it turns out you don't have to struggle to grow.
Yes.
I think I had the same mentality in picking China. I was like, this is going to be hard. And I want something that's going to be hard.
Totally. And I'm going to come out the other side a total battle axe. And like, come at me, world.
Instead, we came out like jelly.
It's so squishy. Please be nice to me.
So squishy. Please don't hate me.
I cried in the first 2 minutes of this podcast.
I know. Oh my God. I remember getting on the plane that took me from, I think it was Shanghai to Detroit. And the flight from Shanghai to Detroit was like, it was a bunch of Detroit women on it who were the stewardesses. And I just remember crying. So I was like, oh my God, it's my people. And it's like just nice Midwestern kind of tough women. And I literally remember crying and having diarrhea on that plane.
Same time.
Same time. So I came back a squishy pile of jelly.
Yeah. Well, I didn't quite have that sense of coming back that you did. Like you got to be like, I'm done with this, I'm out. And then you got to go back to the States. And wow, it was amazing to just see you like blah, like literally like a blooming flower. To just be like, now this is where I can like regain my strength a bit. And I just followed Wally, was like again being like, I'll just do whatever you want to do. Yeah, that's fine. Even though like I had a great time. We did like a trip around Southeast Asia, backpacking, which I'd never done before. And he got an opportunity in Thailand to be a scuba diving instructor. I have a phobia of the ocean. But
you're like, sure, sounds great.
Great.
Yes, let's do that.
Fantastic. We moved there. I vowed when I left China that I would not teach again. Like in the same fashion that I had been teaching in China, which was like, you don't have to be a professional. You're just a person who happens to be from an English-speaking country, and you get thrown in with a random curriculum. And I never taught kids, even when I was in China. I always taught adults because I just don't have the energy to teach children. And I found myself in Thailand getting sunburned every day, teaching children with, another difficult Asian language to learn. And I didn't realize at the time, but that was the first time when I was like truly burnt out. And again, why I'm in Germany now is because in China, Facebook is blocked. So I lost touch with loads of people that I had connections with in Ireland. And then when I got to Thailand, suddenly I had access to Facebook again. And one of the people that I got in touch with was my friend from university, Natalie. She'd been in the Chinese village with me that first year. And we caught up and she was like, could I be frank? You sound fucking miserable.
Mhm.
And you're super sunburned. And I live in Berlin, Germany, and I have a spare room. And like, come here and see if you like it. And I was still
Oh, what a
with Wally.
lifeline.
Oh
Mhm.
my God, an angel, a real one.
Yeah.
And I was still with Wally. But at that time, this lifeline, like you said, that I was just like, that is absolutely where I have to go. And like it was
Mhm.
suddenly like, zoom, there's your intuition again. Like
Mm.
after a 5-year hiatus.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was in 2015, and I've been living here ever since.
And she's
So
thriving now, motherfuckers. She's got like you like doubled your salary in the last like year. I remember too, you and I talking about just like feeling like we could never hold down like a big girl job. And it's like, look at us both now making big girl money and like
big girls.
thriving. This is such a wild conversation to
Right.
revisit. And I
Dip
know
back in.
yeah, and I know we've talked about it a lot over the last several years, but it's just so crazy to see where we were 10 years ago and where we are
Mm-hmm.
now. And it's like, I
Mm.
certainly couldn't have planned this.
Mm.
Like, there's no way I would have. I mean, it all happened like it was supposed to, I think. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if
Mm-hmm.
I'd be who I am now had I not had the adversity that I faced in China. I don't know if I would be,
Totally.
I don't know if I'd be a raging feminist or
Right.
liberal had I not gone through the bullshit that I've been through in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to your intuition piece, I love that you asked me that because I feel like you have always had a very strong intuition and been very good at understanding your internal world.
Mm.
And like, I always feel like Sophie's like my unofficial therapist sometimes because one of your passions is reading about like how our brains work and,
Yeah.
figuring out relationships and things like that. Like, you love it. And I just take what you tell me and I'm like, okay, well, thank you, Sophie. I will maybe do that someday. And the intuition piece that you asked me earlier was like, do you feel like you like lost your intuition being in China? I don't know if I ever fully had
Mm.
intuition that I allowed myself to think of or
Mhm.
accept because I think partially because of like my people pleasing tendencies, it was like my intuition or feelings never really mattered. And I feel like I have not understood my intuition until these last couple of years, probably more so now than ever
Yeah.
before. Because even just like, I was thinking about this last night. I went on 2 dates yesterday, which is a side story. I'm trying to wrap it up because I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I'm like, we'll wrap it up with a funny story because I feel like Sophie and I could literally talk for days.
Yes.
I went on 2 dates yesterday and they were both just 1 hour long, which is perfect. One was a lunch with a guy who looks just like, do you remember that toxic man who his name rhymes with schmakeup? who I
Sure.
who is on the East Coast and
Yes,
he
yes, yes.
yeah, was my friend for a very
Uh-huh,
long
uh-huh,
time. He
uh-huh.
looks, first of all, this man who I went on a lunch date with looks exactly like him. But yes, but not, doesn't seem like a raging narcissist slash maybe a psychopath. I don't know. He was great. And then the second date I went on was very much not a romantic match at all. Total sweetie pie. But as I got into my car, I remember just thinking like, old Chloe a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago when I was like really in the dating field again, probably would have given both of these people a chance of
Mm.
like, oh, I hope he texts me and I hope like we see each other
Mm.
again. And like, even though there was zero connection with the person who I hung out with last night, he was a total sweetie pie, but it was like my baby brother who might be closeted. And like, not that my baby brother is not closeted, but this person seemed like he might be closeted. And then the other guy where I'm like, I might have a casual relationship with this person for fun, but like there's no universe where we would ever date. And I
Mm-hmm.
can only think about how I was so desperate for love a couple of years ago that I would have ignored everything that I didn't want and
Mm-hmm.
just been like, well, here are the things that they could possibly be. They might be. Let me take that like little inch.
Potential.
Exactly. And I just love now that I am in a place where I'm like, no, thank you. There ain't no
Mm.
potential available here in my heart.
Amazing.
I'm like, we could have some fun, we could hang out, but like, that's not, you're not getting any love from this lady over here. It took me a long time to get here. And it's like, even, San Diego, apparently it's pretty normal to get ghosted and like people who will just like make plans and then just not actually act on them. And that's happened a couple of times with some very attractive men.
Dang
and
it.
again, old Chloe would have like continued to try and like test the water and like text them and like, but like the second that something falls through or that a vibe feels off, I'm just like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm like,
You're
if
competing with this, with
you are
all this.
you're competing with the peace I have within myself now. And I tell you what, nobody's coming in to fuck that up.
Damn.
Boom, mic drop. And that is how we end this episode.
Love it.
So I don't even, I think that's a good enough wrap up because it's like, that's telling of where we are now. And to also give you guys insight, Sophie is happily engaged to a wonderful man who I love very much. His name's Brian. They are the cutest couple. They complement each other in such good ways, and they're an inspiration to my own love life. So we both have happy endings. They're both, or I mean, happy middles, because this is not an ending.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. What'd you think about your first podcasting?
Thanks for having me.
What'd you think about your first podcasting experience?
I don't know what to do with my hands.
It's so funny because it's like normal. I'll be like, yeah, go follow them on here and here. And it's like, nah, just appreciate the Sophie love that you guys all received.
Don't tag me. Don't follow me. I'm never on social media. No. I don't have TikTok.
Do you have just like a message you want to share with the world? Anything? Like my following is essentially me. It's like me, maybe a little younger, maybe a little less experienced in life, or just like, you know, less experience with money.
Well, I know that you already do a lot of work around values. I'm all about values at the moment. Also your intuition and getting back into your body and like doing that through interesting sensual practices, like take a shower with the lights off.
Ooh.
And just like feel that water on your skin and smell your soap and all those things. And like weird embodying sensory things to help you tap into that intuition. And from that point, look at your values again and say, like, what am I doing of a day to day? Is it in line with my values? Is this in line with my intuition? Because I think to summarize everything that we just told you about our lives in our early 20s was like, none of that was existent. We were not connected to our bodies or our intuition. Like, don't even talk about the brain. Like, even the body was like constant fight or flight. And still we were like, this is fine.
Everything's fine. This is what I deserve. This is like how people live their life, right?
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, probably there is a lot of people who live their life that way, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It's very, that's a very human response in today's world. So yeah, it's a constant practice to try and get back in your body. So that would be my little pearl of wisdom to leave people with. Try go be in your body.
I love that pearl of wisdom. You're calling me in, girl. So, well, I loved having you on. So we might have to have you on again in the future to gab about something else. Yes. I love you so much. And if you guys enjoyed this episode with Sophie, let me know. Because if you're telling me like we need more Sophie, I'm going to make her get on this pod. We'll just like start paying her and be like, all right, girl, you're a guest host this week.
Totally fine. Maybe next time I will have a light switched on so that it won't be complete darkness by the end of the hour.
Oh my gosh, I love it. She's in Germany now. So, all right, I have to speed off and go, but I love you so much. And thank you for coming on. Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a second to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately. And because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary. And keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, also, I've got a free investing class that is available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. We host it once a month. If you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.